what is my feeling about the way forward for the U.S. and Canada in the NAFTA negotiations? Going back, I think I'll do a quick history. Going back to November of 2016, I spoke in front of a group of Canadians here in Ottawa at a think tank panel, and one of the things that I said to them at that time was, it's very important to keep in mind that Donald Trump really doesn't have Canada in the crosshairs, and it would be a good idea to keep a warm relationship with him, to keep a low profile, to understand there are only really a couple of issues that could be irksome, and we should be prepared to deal with those. I'm sorry to say that I don't really think that the government has played it that way. They chose to include issues that don't really seem to have much to do with trade: gender parity, Indigenous issues, other things of that nature, kind of social issues, climate change and the like. And these are things that I'm sure that the negotiators, Lighthizer and Ross, are sitting there thinking, really, what does this have to do with trade? In fact, Canada needed to worry about softwood lumber. They needed to worry about Buy America. They needed to worry about the dairy trade. These are the things that are irksome to American trade specialists. And sadly, they didn't focus on that until there was a point at which it kind of got thrown in their faces by the American negotiators. So now I guess they're stuck having to deal with it. I'm hoping that some wiser heads have prevailed. We still have some time. It isn't going to be over, I don't think, for quite some time. It looks like it's been extended into well into 2018 to have these discussions. So hopefully they'll right the ship. That's all I can say. Talking about the respect between the two parties, I think that basically both entities, I don't want to speak to any particular individual, but both entities understand that they are good friends, that Canada and the U.S. are great friends, that they've had a long history of a good relationship, both on the trade front and every other way. Our borders have always been relatively open. It's always been a friendly relationship. The problem is that we have, I think, two very different personalities at the top of the heap on both sides. We have President Trump, who's a very distinct personality, and his counter and the polar opposite is Justin Trudeau on every single level. While Trump says he likes Trudeau, I'm sure he does like him, just like a guy, he likes him, but I'm not sure he has any respect for him as a person. I guess that we'll have to wait and see what happens. I'm not sure how Wilbur Ross and Robert Lighthizer feel about our foreign affairs minister and some of the people doing the negotiating. I'm not sure. It's hard to say. It's hard to say how the Secretary of State feels about our foreign minister. So I'm only hoping that they've made better inroads than perhaps the Prime Minister did with President Trump. The comment that Chrystia Freeland made about hoping for the best and preparing for the worst is hugely problematic, I think, from my perspective. These are things that you don't say in public. These are things that you say behind closed doors. This is exactly the kind of thing that I was talking about that we should not be doing. We need to understand that the relationship between Canada and the U.S. on a diplomatic front has to be dealt with in a diplomatic way. And these comments are not helpful. I think they're very not helpful. Well, the worst case scenario for Canada, I think, would be if the U.S. completely withdrew from NAFTA and didn't want to have any kind of relationship with Canada. I don't honestly see that as a possibility. I think our economies are too intertwined. On the state level, forget about the federal level, but on the state level, many of our states and provinces do trade directly with one another, and I think that we need to keep that in mind. So maybe the worst case scenario is a bilateral agreement, which will be a tougher bilateral agreement than the current arrangement that we have through NAFTA. I think they need to be prepared for that, because Donald Trump is at his heart a negotiator. But forget about Donald Trump. Remember, Wilbur Ross has been around a long time and was involved in NAFTA at the beginning, and he understands this trade stuff from day one. So how I see this turning out at the end of this negotiation, and this is maybe the hopeful me speaking, is that there would be a bilateral agreement, which will reinforce the relationship between Canada and the United States on a trade level, which hopefully will not completely dismantle the work that we've done on things like softwood lumber and dairy and other areas. And Buy America will not become the stance of the U.S. government, that they will rather say, we understand that Canada supplies things to us that we need, and we want that relationship to continue. That's my hope. I believe that is really where the United States wants to go. The question is, can we not antagonize them so that they actually go that way? So what I would recommend to the United States is to understand that Canada really does want this relationship, that Canada needs to have a good trading partner. It's more than a trade relationship, it's really a friendship relationship, it's a common values relationship, and we don't want to destroy it over trade. I don't think that's the intent of the U.S., and I think that if it's reinforced by the government that what we actually want is this great relationship, that the U.S., if I were advising the U.S., I would stick with that. On the Canadian side, they need to stop saying things like, we build bridges, not walls. We're hoping for the best and preparing for the worst. They need to stop talking like that out in public. They need to actually be positive, forward-thinking, try to understand the people that are involved in this trade negotiation on the U.S. side, and realize they're not our enemies, they're our friends and our allies, and that everyone can benefit from trade. And I don't think that Donald Trump and his team feel differently about that. They just want to be sure that trade is fair as well as free. I would say I would like to see fair trade, and I would like to see some optimism on our side from Canada toward the U.S. Fairness matters a lot, and optimism is important from the perspective of sending the right message to the U.S. So obviously, one of the things that I think the Canadian team thought was a good idea was to move towards TPP and the new iteration of that without the U.S. involved in it, which was, I think, designed to send a message to the United States, well, you know, if this doesn't work out with you guys, we don't really need you. But that is very short-sighted thinking. We exist on the same continent with the United States. Our economies are very intertwined, as I said. To try to undo it would be like trying to cut through the Gordian knot, which is going to be impossible to do and damaging to everybody involved. So my feeling is that what they need to do is realize that this is not the way to go. They need to keep this positive attitude. They need to make sure that they maintain this relationship with the United States. There are other players out there, China, India, the European Union, all of whom want in. And there's nothing wrong with trading with everyone. I believe that trade is a great thing. One of the things that Prime Minister Harper did when he was here was have 42 trade agreements. I think that's a wonderful thing. But we need to understand that our biggest trade partner is still the United States, and we don't want to ruin that relationship.